Today on Faith Focus, we're going to really quickly unpack some struggles for people that have trouble with the Trinity. And I had an explanation, which I'll put in the description, of the Holy Trinity. And somebody reached out and said, okay, I get that, but if Jesus was still fully God, why was he praying to God the Father from the cross? So if he was still fully God, even though he was the Son, how does he pray to himself? I don't get that. And it's hard. And listen, don't be discouraged if there's elements of the faith that, jumble your brain. Those are what we call the mysteries of faith. And the reason they're called that is because we can intellectualize them all we want. And the doctors of the faith have certainly struggled with their own descriptions of this, even for themselves. So they've struggled too, right? And they've written countless essays and books, and they've unpacked this fully and are still figuring it out. So these mysteries of the faith, they're meant for us to chew on. They aren't necessarily meant for us to solve. So when you catch yourself in one of those moments, get excited. Don't get discouraged. Because what I've learned is that some of the best aspects of our faith are the ones I don't understand. And some of the best conversations I have with other Catholics are us trying to unpack theories like this for each other, or just try to figure it out. And even us not being able to figure it out is like working on the best puzzle ever made, So don't feel like you need to come to a full understanding of everything. Because, like I said, the doctors of the faith have been digesting this stuff for centuries, right? So it's okay if you struggle a little. But when it comes to looking at the specific issue of Jesus praying to God the Father, this is how I've made sense of it in my own mind, okay? Jesus came to earth to have a full human experience. Part of that was to develop empathy, because God can only conceptualize, I guess, what the human experience is like, because God never had a human experience until Jesus. So when Jesus came to earth, he didn't come to earth like a half man. Although he was fully God, he was given a full human experience, which means he had to suffer and he had to be tempted, right? So, if the temptation wasn't real, then it wouldn't have to be 40 days in the desert, right? If the fear wasn't real before he was arrested, he wouldn't have been sweating blood, right? So Jesus lost his temper that day when he kicked everybody out of the temple, right? The money lenders. When he threw them out of the temple, he didn't do it gently. He didn't bake cookies and make a kind request, right? He lost it and kicked everybody out. So Jesus came with a full spectrum of human emotions, and he came for a full spectrum of human experience. Had he not suffered on the cross, if that death wasn't as brutal as it was, would it have truly been a sacrifice? Part of the reason why it's such a big deal to us, the Passion, why we do the Stations of the Cross, was to commemorate how horrific his journey was, and that he went into it knowing full well it was going to suck. You know what I mean? He knew what he was going to suffer, enough that he was so scared he sweat blood. So he came to feel what it was like to be fully human, and to be fully human means to be fully vulnerable. And he allowed himself that feeling. And in that moment of vulnerability, he prayed to the higher part of himself, right? That higher self of his. He prayed to God the Father. Still him. So when I look at it in ways that I can digest, I put it this way. You know how sometimes a childhood trauma or a trauma of some sort can leave you triggered? So somebody could say something completely innocently that no other person would react to, but because you have that trigger, right? You're automatically going to get your back up as soon as you hear a thing. And I'm not going to say wrong to do it, because trauma is trauma and your reactions are your reactions. But, right, if you're emotionally mature, that's part of emotional maturity, is to be able to recognize those moments. So you get your back up, and that moment of wisdom where you say, you know what? I know that I'm feeling this right now, not because I'm right to, but because I'm triggered. And that's not that's not the fault of the person who just said this thing, because they're not saying it in any sort of way. I'm taking it away because I have issues when it comes to this subject. So let me take a step back and not be emotionally reactive, right? And let me try and think through this. And so I can respond like a normal, rational person who's not baggaged and triggered would respond. In that moment of wisdom, in that moment of emotional maturity, you're acting like God the Father, and you're speaking to your inner wounded child, right? Which would be the son, that vulnerable part of you that is having this very human experience, which in the moment really sucks, right? And you're appealing to the wiser, more mature part of yourself that's able to help get you through a situation that otherwise would have wrecked your day. But now you've been able to talk yourself through it and hopefully transcend it. So that's a very similar reaction. They're very two different parts of you. The wise part of you is very different from that wounded child, and yet you're the same person, right? You're just looking at the same instance from two different perspectives. So God, in his infinite everything, right? He is able to look at it as the Alpha Omega, right? The creator of all things, which compared to, we are minuscule, as are our problems, right? The creator of the whole universe. And then there's Jesus Christ, who came down to earth to have a very human experience, to relate to us on that level of intimacy, to be able to say, I've been there. And you know, how many times do you hear someone, let's say, who's a drug addict and they're going to therapy, right? They will believe a drug counselor who themselves have championed addiction. But if they're speaking to a counselor that's never had a problem with substances, all of a sudden you'll see a resistance there. There's something special about talking with someone who's actually experienced the thing that you've struggled with. There's a relatability there that can't be faked. And it's not something that you get from reading about it, right? You have to actually experience it to really understand a thing. And that's what Jesus gave us when he came here. The ability for God to not only say, yeah, I know what you're feeling because I created you to feel these things, right? But to say, no, I actually lived it. I actually came down and I was a man. So now when God's asking us to do certain things, he can, because he's been there, done that. So he's fully aware in an experiential way what he's asking. And compared to what he's done for us, there's nothing he can ask that's too much. And that's how I see it. And hopefully that helps your perception. Again, possibly not even theologically accurate. I don't claim to be a theologian at all, but this is just how my brain has wrestled with this mystery. And hopefully that's helpful to you too. Be blessed, everyone.